Hello, everyone. Welcome to the New Polity podcast. I'm Andrew Jones, and I'm here with David Schindler. And we are going to talk a bit about authority. I believe you have a book forthcoming. With the title I've seen is Authority and Its Counterfeits.
Yes, it's a completed manuscript, and it's at a press being reviewed. So
awesome.
We hope it'll come through.
And we have here an article that I assume a somewhat of a piece of the book, or a summary of some of the thesis, of the arguments in the book. That I've read and that we're going to discuss a little bit here. And it's on the topic of authority, and which is an interesting topic, obviously incredibly important. In fact, towards the end of the essay, one of the things you say, which I caught my attention, was, if all of this is true, meaning all the arguments you've made, which no doubt they are, then the crisis of authority may be said to be the greatest of all human crises. Even if it is the one of human making.
Yeah.
The greatest of all human crises.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is quite the assertion.
Yeah.
And I'm convinced that you're right.
Okay.
But I think that in order for us to understand that, or for the listeners to understand what you mean, we may have to adjust what a lot of people think authority is.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if I could just say one thing to maybe at least make that slightly plausible, it struck me at a certain point that when Nietzsche in The Gay Science has that famous passage, which is always worth rereading. People think they know what he says there, but it's always worth rereading, where he talks about the death of God, and and says God has died and we killed him. And then he goes on to say that, we no longer have up or down, left or right. The world is spinning out of control. I actually have come to think that what he means by the death of God is the disappearance from the face of the earth of any real authority.
I think that's right.
And, his response was the will to power, which is it's a very obvious compensation for authority on totally different grounds and problematic grounds, but it seems to me that that's and so he had the sense that nothing is going to really make sense if authority is gone, and
he says elsewhere on the same lines, doesn't he, that how can we be worthy of such a crime?
Yeah.
And
yeah,
it's like, well, we must become gods ourselves in order to be worthy of it.
Right. Yeah, which is amazing, and to fill the hole.
Yeah, that's I think what he's saying.
Yeah, and you think about God, but God in a way it's one thing to say God is dead, but if God is simply a transcendent being that has no connection to reality, then that's an event that's not going to have. However dramatic it sounds, it's actually not going to have much of an impact on things. But if you think about, God has to be present also somehow in the world,
right? And
as Christians, we believe he was present in Christ, but Christ lived and died. There has to be some actual residue, some representative, some abiding memory. And in a real and effective way of God's presence, or else, effectively, whether God exists or not, he's dead as far as the world is concerned,
right.
And we face exactly that problem. So, what's at stake there is you might say a representative of the ultimate principle, the first principle of all things, the final end of all things. The one reality that makes sense of the world.
Well, that's one of the ironies with Nietzsche, isn't it? That the magnitude of the death of God is lost if we take what he seems to say otherwise about the unreality of God to begin with. I mean, that God is no different than the gods, or other, and therefore the death of God is just the passing of one myth, and now we're in the position of the creation of another. But he doesn't actually. Other places he doesn't seem to be saying that. He seems to understand something more monumental has occurred.
It's interesting. There's a letter that he says to his sister, who was losing her faith, and he actually becomes quite emotional as far as you can tell in the letter, and just says, whatever else happens, don't let that happen. I mean,
right.
There was a side to him.
Yeah, it's a tragic and almost. Sometimes I sense a sort of like desperate kind of vandalism or iconoclasm, where like he knows there's like a sort of a rage, and therefore a lashing out and a destruction of that which at some level he suspects to be true. Yeah,
right. Well, it's sort of like someone who finally comes to terms with or believes that he or she will not finally get married, but that's what the person wants more than anything. That can turn into then a hatred of marriage.
Exactly.
But that's in a way evidence of how profound. And I think that longing for God and therefore authority. So
that's the catch.
That's the catch. So it seems to me the reason I like to connect it with that point in Nietzsche is that we tend to think of authority, and I'm sure we'll get into this a bit, but we tend to think of it really pragmatically. That authority is just what puts order into things. So authority has a kind of a practical purpose of establishing rules, kind of getting things in line. And of course, that's part of it. It's an essential part of it. But I think that there's a deeper role that we tend not to be aware of. And that itself is a sign that we've lost a sense of what authority is. But the deeper role, if you look back in what authority has meant in the tradition, you see it's effectively establishing the whole horizon of existence. So the horizon within which things make sense, within which they have a kind of a meaning, and then within that a principle of order. So it's more. It has to do with not just with our will, but also our intelligence and our way of life, and how we live, how we build, how we organize society, our institutions. All of these things, either take place within a horizon established by authority, or it's just a pragmatic compensation.
In that way of thinking, isn't it, that authority becomes different than what most people maybe hold it to be? Because it seems like what authority, the way you're describing, is authority is some principle or some presence that reaches beyond that which I currently comprehend or control or dominate, right? And but nevertheless, it's in my world, and so it's accessible to me. It can speak to me. There's something that makes it possible for me to move past where I am.
That's right.
But I don't think that that's the way most people in our day and age, like you said, we forgot how to think about authority.
Sure.
Is authority, and this is something you mentioned in the article, is often little more than power with some kind of legitimacy. But that legitimacy then becomes the philosophical question. Well, what is legitimacy? And then it seems
and
like...
what legitimates the legitimizers.
And then you're kicking the can down the road, and you end up with some notion of like legal positivism, some notion of like historicism, some notion of there being some kind of spirit, maybe even like a Hegelianism or something that will ground that authority, but nevertheless still within the horizon. We've lost that notion of authority as that which is beckoning beyond it.
Yeah. Right? Well, that's why, I mean, at the heart of my understanding, the understanding that I've come to through thinking about this and reading about it for quite some time now, and I realize that this is something I've been thinking about my whole life. It took me a while to be aware of that. Is that authority has an essentially sacramental character, and what I mean by that, not in the strict sense of a sacrament, but genuinely analogous to it, that it's a mediating principle. So authority is precisely what allows the transcendent order to be realized within the immanent sphere. The authority is one that sort of stands right at the threshold between the two and mediates the higher to the lower, and then in a certain sense the lower to the higher plays that mediating role. And if that's true, I very much think it is. I mean, I'm absolutely convinced about this now. If that's true, then without some real living sense of a transcendent order, you can't possibly distinguish authority from power. And then authority then just becomes one of the elements within this order that finds other elements within the same immanent order to back it up.
Right. Well, I mean, even to push a little further, without the actual existence of that transcendent, beyond just the sense of it, like the actual existence of it, then this authority is always a facade or a ruse of some sort.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, that's
unless it in fact exists.
That's right. That's right. And right. So first of all, it has to exist, and then secondly, we have to be aware of its existence
in order to perceive it.
Yeah. And in order for it to sort of resonate into us, I mean, there are all sorts of ways that authority is inescapable. So I think that because the transcendent order is real and will be reflected one way or the other within the immanent sphere, even if we reject it or deny it, it's going to come back to haunt us. It's going to come back in some falsified form, an idol of some sort.
Yeah, absolutely.
That will take its place, and that's absolutely inevitable. So as human beings, we can't but have a sense of some justification for power that transcends power.
Don't you think that's because of the very nature of rationality, that as a participation in the divine intellect, that it always surpasses itself?
Yeah.
And so there must be some moving past, or some avenue or some pathway or something that moves us out of that which is immediate in particular, like an animal, right, into some notion of the universal. And if it's not, that notion can be a counterfeit. But it seems like even the assent to the counterfeit has something of the true rational action in it.
That's right. Yeah. So there's a hopeful version of it and a kind of despairing version. So a hopeful version, and I think they're both true, the hopeful and the despairing version. I mean, the hopeful version is, we can't kill God, in spite of what Nietzsche says. So, I mean, there's going to be some seeds of reality that are inescapable. The despairing view is that we so distort whatever seeds are there that rather than eliminating them, we pervert their growth, and they turn into monsters of some sort. And I think our world is filled with both of these, true seeds and monster seeds, as it were.
But the inability for the counterfeit to ground itself isn't that the basis of the downward spiral of all sort of tyrannical regimes, like Plato says, and everyone, right. They can't actually sustain themselves. They're always parasitical on that residue of the truth, and so they always ultimately decline and fall. Yeah. Whereas true authority is the opposite.
Sometimes doing a lot of damage in the meantime.
An immense amount of damage. I mean, that doesn't mean like, we win in the end. Yeah, so you got to go through some nastiness to get there. But the true authority operates in the opposite way. That instead of a descent, a sort of a spiraling descent, there's a spiraling ascent.
Yeah.
But there's a similarity, I think, a similarity in the way that can be perceived by those who are under authority. Like, isn't it hard to distinguish if you're under authority, under power, whether or not the one in authority is leading you down or up?
Yeah. Right. No, I think it is. I mean, and part of the problem is that in a certain way, I mean, I guess I have mixed feelings about this. In some sense, everyone's a philosopher. In some sense, philosophers are rare. That paradox that Plato talks about, I think, is really true. But and what do I mean in this case? I mean that human beings should be allowed to live naturally. I mean, should be allowed. I mean, there's a certain sense in which we don't. It's tragic to be put in a position where we have to scrutinize every authority and raise questions, and there's something unnatural about that constant scrutiny and skepticism, whereas in a natural culture, you could just sort of trust. There's a in a sort of traditional culture that has a kind of a traditional, a long history that has established itself. There's a way in which this kind of trust would become much more natural and would be healthy in its kind of natural state.
Well, this is something I wanted to bring up with you because this leads me to something I was thinking about, which is, say, in the Republic, we've been talking about Plato. We seem to always go back to Plato. But the rule of the philosopher king, or the rule of a true authority, is coupled with the obedience of a virtuous citizenry.
Yeah.
And this seems to be like the city itself is philosophical.
Yeah.
Right. And it has a philosophical ruler, but the citizens themselves are assenting
right.
to that philosophical rule in a philosophical manner.
Right.
And that it's the virtue or lack of virtue, the vices of the citizenry are tied directly to the form of power that is possible for the city to have.
Yeah,
right.
That prevails
in which
regime.
prevails.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
But this seems to me to somewhat put into tension or I don't know, maybe mitigate against some sense of authority as traditional minded people might sometimes maintain it, which is the idea of the authority as some power that demands submission and that holds that authority in some sort of a positivistic or official capacity, like they hold the office,
right? And
therefore they have the legitimacy, and therefore they demand the submission. But in fact, it seems like authority, true authority, philosophical authority leading into greater truth, is something that is only really manifest, not just in a potential way, but in an actual way, when it is met with an obedience that is likewise moving past itself.
That's right.
And therefore looking for the authority.
Yeah.
Right. And receptive to the authority.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, that's as human beings, we're all in a way mediators between the transcendent and the immanent. I mean, to have intelligence, to be an embodied spirit, an embodied soul, as human beings are by nature, rational animals with reason. We all, in a way, live at that mediating place. But so, in a certain sense, there's something authoritative in human existence. I mean, that in itself would be an interesting thing to reflect on. But the reason I bring this up is I think a false way to think of it is. Let me put it this way. I associate the notion of analogy very much with authority. So analogy, authority comes from the word augere, and at the root of auctoritas, the auctor, the author. But that comes from augere, which means to increase or grow, to augment. And the sign of an actual authority is not one who demands submission, but one who, in a way, liberates participation,
right?
Inspires participation, and so that means that it's a univocal reduction of authority to think that you've got the masses here, and then you have a single person who comes in as the authority, who then imposes order in a kind of a direct way.
But you get that sort of reduction sometimes. I mean, I encounter it often where even the notion of freedom is reduced among traditional minded people to submission to the true authority.
Yeah.
Like the submission of your will to the true authority, and now you're free.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, no, that's not. I don't think that's
actually
that's not quite capturing the essence of this.
Yeah. But one of the things is one of the evidences, or one of the manifestations of authority, is precisely the authority is bearing witness to an order that transcends even him.
That's right, but he has to bear that witness. The bearing of the witness is in the world.
That's right.
The world that he's speaking to.
That's right.
In their language.
Right. So then that's the other part. If he's bearing witness to an order that transcends him, there's a certain sense in which that order is accessible to others.
The witness has to be intelligible.
That's right. It has to be intelligible, and so the assent to authority is not a blind obedience. It's actually a recognition of an order that belongs to all of us. that in a way is being mediated in a special way, and I don't mean that in a trivial sense. I mean, I do think there's something distinctive about having an office, and but that's mediating something that exceeds the office, and therefore there's it depends in some basic way on the freedom of the consent of the people and so forth. That's an ingredient to the whole.
But it's an interesting one, because if it's a true authority, like you said, that is it's not just mediating the transcendent down. I mean, I know that that's true, but it's also mediating that which is lower into the transcendent. Right. It's also like leading them in. It's not just something coming down. It's them. Right. It's them coming up.
Yeah, that's why I said the mediation goes in both directions.
It goes in both directions.
Yeah. Like a priest in a church, is sort of mediating the people to God and mediating God to the people, both at once in his person.
So that means he's speaking, the authority is speaking into the dialogue, which is the polity, or the people, the community, in a way that they understand, but not in a way that the meaning of what he's saying is exhausted in what they already know.
That's right.
So one of the things that like Plato says about the sophists is they just tell people what they already know, right? And they do it in a fancy way.
What they want to.
What they
want to hear.
But to tell people not what they already know, but somehow within their world, right? So their world. What I'm trying to get at is that the human world, is already prepared in some way, for its own surpassing, right? So like, and therefore when someone comes in who's speaking in such a way as being recognizably speaking truth, because your world has an analogical truth to it, assuming it's just, right? He's speaking to you in that world, but then showing you something greater. That greater something, it's a paradox, I guess, is somehow recognizable to me from my lower position.
That's right.
And if it's not, this is the way in which it seems to me that a people, and I'm not trying to say that the authority tells you something you already know. He's telling you something new, but it's recognizable to you as something new.
It resonates actually as true.
Like that's true.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
And that seems to be a manner in which authority can be authentic authority, like it actually rules, but is nevertheless somehow accountable to the judgment of the people.
That's right. That's right.
Because they can say that's not true.
Yeah. Yeah,
right.
It's interesting. So in the book version, you read the essay version. I spend quite a bit of time unfolding the analogy of authority, and one of the arguments I make is that authority has in a way three faces: the priest, the prophet, and the king. And we tend to think of just the king as having authority, but there's the authority as genuinely transcending any particular representative, in a way can only have its full reality as distributed in a way among these three sort of symbolic figures. And the prophet is the one who sort of speaks to the king, right? Is the one that exceeds the office, the institutional office, but is precisely thereby, in some sense, can have a certain access to the truth that's manifest in the world, the truth of nature, the sense of justice and so forth, that reflects it back to the king. And there you do see, if the king in a way disregards that, that's a sign that he has no authority. Because now it's become a kind of a willful imposition of power, as opposed to the fact that the king actually represents in a way represents and safeguards the order that you, the people, already participate in.
Right. Yeah. The problem maybe being if the king is just and the people are unjust.
Yeah.
Now, now he appears to them as a tyrant.
Yeah.
The king does.
Right.
Even though he is in fact not.
That's right.
Right.
That's right. Yeah.
And so then it's like, does he have authority? It's like, well, sort of.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's really interesting. I mean, this is why, you're the historian, you know these things infinitely better than I do. But in the Middle Ages, I came across a passage, I think I cited in the essay, where this historian of political authority political power. It's just a history of political philosophy, and the person is not. It's an old classic. He's not himself a Christian. He recognizes that there was something in the medieval instantiation of authority that is paradigmatic and much more complex and mysterious and interesting than people think. The king is one who's, in one sense, has authority by nature from the bloodline, but then also is appointed by God. And then also has to be, the acclamation has to be received by the people. And this historian says somehow the medieval mind didn't see any tension at all.
No, they're different versions of the same thing.
They're different versions of the same thing.
They're different ways of describing the same reality, which is authority.
Right. That's right, which is authority. And you realize that doesn't mean that you could get rid of one of those. You realize in a way they can be different versions of the same thing as long as they're all three there. So somehow authority is a gift from God. It's something that has a natural foundation, and it's something that has a foundation in the will of the people. And all of those are ingredients.
There's a something that I've been thinking about very much along those lines is the manner in which if humanity's mission or part of our calling is to exceed ourselves, and to order the world in a way that exceeds what it naturally does, right, and therefore we are in a sort of co-creation situation, right, where we are going to order this world in a rational way that exceeds its own abilities. That applies to us too. I mean, that in order for us to do that, we are exceeding our own resources, which means there has to be a moment of receptivity, that we are receiving that which then allows the action of rule, like of the dominion, right? That first there's an act of reception,
that's right,
and then an act, but both of those components, the reception and the action, are essential to what this means, to what any sort of rule like this, and that the medieval church, the medieval Christendom, understood that in a way that became manifested actually structurally, that you had the spiritual and the temporal powers, you had the bishop who's anointing the king, and he's in a passive position of sort of a receptivity of this grace that then allows him to rule. But that doesn't mean he's now ruling over the bishop, nor does it mean the bishop is now ruling over him.
That's right.
That gift down was not a substitution for the king's then action forward.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
Those aren't in competition.
Yeah.
With
No.
each other.
It's such a beautiful, interesting thing. I mean, because this in a way is how the bishop has political power. By in a way giving that political power to the king. I mean, and that. So you've got the one authority there, but the authority has, again, several sources. In the king's nature, in the gift of through the anointing, and then also would have, I mean, this is something that would be reflected in the customs and traditions of the people. It's sort of built into the natural world. All of those things are an ingredient to this single authority that sort of extends. It's the augmentation. But what I find really interesting, so. This might sound abstract, but I think it becomes a little easier to see when we contrast it with something that arose then in the late Middle Ages and more in the birth of the modern world, which is the divine right of kings. Yeah. Which, it's interesting. It's the
repudiation of this.
It's a repudiation.
They actually start denying the anointing. Like they don't want kings don't want to be anointed anymore.
Right. That's right.
Get away from me, bishop.
Yeah, no, but isn't that interesting? I think people think that the medieval view is the divine right of kings. It's not at all.
They have very little in common.
Yeah. So what do you have there? You have then the king claiming that God is speaking. He's got the bat phone, right? That God is speaking directly to him, and it's not through the mediation. So there's no gift.
It's not through the mediation not only of the sacramental church and the clergy, but it's also doesn't have anything to do with the people.
Exactly, precisely.
So the will of God is manifested to the people only through the word of the king.
That's right. So
my will is law.
So this is what they say. No, it's amazing, and this is a univocalizing of power, as opposed to the analogy of authority that has its reality in this,
Well, that's why I was saying what the direction I kind of wanted to go with that idea that the the passivity of the king in receiving from the bishop and then his activity in ruling, that and they're not in competition with each other. No. That is true throughout the whole kingdom. So like when we were earlier talking about how the people and the disposition of the people and the disposition of the authority are intrinsically related to each other, that the authority that you see in Christendom is then tied directly to the fact that all of the people are receiving this grace from the church, right? That they're all receiving, which is enabling the king to rule as an authority over a people who looks to him as the authority, right? And who has has received from the transcendent that which enables them to take the risk of following the king, because there's a daring in obedience, right?
Of course.
There's like a venturing out,
yeah,
right? And that I will follow this man beyond the law that sustains me in the status quo. I will venture out into the unknown with him, right? And that is, again, I think an exceeding of the human nature. Right, and that goes all the way through society.
Right. I mean, and I mean that gets very interesting even in our relationship to the natural world and the work that we do and that kind of thing. I mean, I think this plays itself out even at that level. But one thing, and I'd be interested to know if you would agree with this particular formulation. It seems to me that. So you mentioned that it's not just the king that receives authority, but in a certain sense, everyone does through the church.
Right.
And I agree with that. I think that I want to say, nevertheless, there's a certain sense in which authority is mediated to the whole body of people, also through the king. And
certainly.
Okay, so but what's interesting about that is this is something that I develop at great length in the book. The king comes to represent something like, precisely because he's at the border between transcendent and there's a certain sense in which he represents the very principle of symbolism. He is like the symbol of symbols, and it's the effective authority of the king that in a way sets a horizon that allows the whole world to have a kind of symbolic or sacramental significance. I mean, historically speaking, it's interesting. The loss of the anointed king seems to coincide also with the loss of a sacramental sense of the world generally. And I think that that's not accidental. So when you start to have a king that has an unmediated authority that becomes unmediated authority is not authority, it's power. That's what then becomes the symbol that gets communicated throughout all the rest of society.
So you end up with liberalism.
So you end up with, that's exactly what you and then
we're all kings. We're all divine right kings.
Yeah, right. We're all divine right kings. That's exactly and that gets manifest even in the way that we treat our things. And the stuff that we make and our families and everything then sort of dissolves. It seems to me that we need to be especially attentive to you might say the paradigmatic or the original symbols.
There's so many like layers that seem to qualify each other here, because when I bring up for lack of a better word, the sort of democratic nature of authority, that there's something about the people as a whole. And then that can start sounding like I'm going to dissolve the kingship into the people and we're going to end up with popular sovereignty or something like that. But then I want to correct myself because what I want to say is the movement of the finite, of the particular, deeper into the transcendent and into the infinite. Precisely because it's the movement of the finite into that which is infinite. It has an infinite number of paths. I mean, what I mean is there is no limit to the way in which we can grow. We can grow literally an infinite number of instantiations of the divine, and infinite modes of imaging the divine, because the divine has no limit. Right. And so, but if that means that the movement into increase has to be a particular trajectory into the increase. Right. And therefore hierarchy and leadership, the guy who says, follow me, is absolutely essential. Otherwise, you don't have a society that is moving in a direction.
That's right. So
and therefore he becomes the symbol of what the guy at the head of that hierarchy becomes the symbol of who we are and where we're going.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and I mean, when the guy in the seat is a problematic guy, then that spells danger for society. We can move into that a little bit later.
It's horrible, yeah.
But I just want to make a point. I think that what's really interesting about this when you think of authority in the terms that we've been discussing as essentially symbolic and revelatory. Mm-hmm. Before commanding. So commanding is one of its activities, but it's a revelation of the horizon of existence. A certain sense, the guidance or the order that's introduced doesn't require him to say follow me. He just has to sort of be.
And they follow him.
Yeah, well, they follow him, or in a certain sense, they receive. I mean, this is it's kind of interesting, and this is absolutely not what you are getting at. But following me doesn't mean everybody has to get into line. I mean, there's a certain sense in which authority proliferates. And it can breed a quite complex and even chaotic society.
This is where when I talk about subsidiarity, and I try to lay so much emphasis on that, because what I'm trying to get at there is that a proper hierarchy with proper authority is always manifested in a society of subsidiarity, which means of diversity.
Absolutely.
But a diversity that isn't in competition with its unity, but is the basis of its unity.
That's right. And it can seem on the surface to be quite chaotic or anarchical, but that's just because the arche has been multiplied. Yeah. And in a healthy sense of that, that's actually life, and that makes the world much more interesting.
It is the truth of the authority of the king, so that the true transcendence of his authority, or the mediation of the transcendent, that allows for diversity underneath him, because the nature of analogy is that the similarity is always offset by the greater difference, and so say if we say the king is the symbol of the society, well, that itself can now be manifested in many different forms, offset by the difference. But then every form
becomes a kind of its own little kingdom and its own little society,
and it has its own legitimacy, its own authority. That's right.
And I actually think that goes all the way. There's a certain sense in which even things can have a proper authority.
I think so.
Like a well-made chair, or I mean, there's something manifestive of obviously it's
beauty.
analogous.
I mean,
beauty and order.
You said something in the article that you wanted beauty of the transcendentals to be the thing you associate with authority.
Oh, yeah. That's another point I'm absolutely convinced
that seems to be touching on what you're saying, that beauty is the experience of the transcendent being mediated into the particular, right? And that's what we perceive.
I mean, doesn't that just seem totally obvious when you think about it? It seems obviously true. One side comment here. There's some people that would get nervous about some of these observations and want to say, well, isn't it the essence of authority is to command and to call the shots, as it were, and it seems like things that we're saying might suggest otherwise. And I would say, first of all, commanding is part of the role of the authority, but here's the problem: when the king or the authority will have to intervene only, and this is something you've written about, only when there's a problem, only to
intervene in a coercive manner.
Intervene in a coercive manner when there's disorder. So, and the problem is that we tend to make that move exemplary, sort of defining what authority is.
What defines fatherhood is his disciplining of the children, instead of his instruction of them.
Yeah, that's right.
The discipline and the causing of the discomfort of the discipline is an essential aspect, but it doesn't. If you reduced it to that, fatherhood is a pretty nasty thing.
It's a nasty thing, and then I mean, and one of the ways that I find a kind of a litmus test when you're talking with somebody to see if they have some sense of what authority is. I ask them, whether there would be any authority in a perfect society. So if the world had never fallen, would there be authority? And I want to say absolutely. In a way, there would never be more authority than in a situation like that, because it's precisely this life-giving way of communing with each other. I mean, it's the realization of order. Coercion wouldn't exist.
Yeah, I'm going to ask. Let me ask you about that, because this is something that I've been thinking about. That I wonder if maybe I even sort of disagree with my previous self on something here. But that is there an aspect of human nature, or a tension within human nature, where that the nature of humanity is to exceed its nature.
Yeah.
And therefore there's a sort of dying to what you were. So what, in order to exceed it. Mm-hmm. And there's a sort of, it's not only an expansion outward into new things, but there's also a sort of turning inward and undoing the old thing.
Yeah.
Do you know? And that old thing, which you in your previous more simple self believed to be truth itself.
Yeah.
Do you know? Yeah. And so there's a sort of,
death to self,
death
of a sort.
inside, and that maybe even without sin, that the king or the ruler would have a certain role of inflicting that. Yeah. Do you know? I mean, like, there's a certain.
That's right. I mean, to be a little cliche or quaint, the caterpillar emerging from the cocoon. I mean, there must have been something so painful. There must be something kind of painful and frightening about that, but it's totally natural, and there's nothing disordered in it. It's actually, you're entering into a higher kind of existence that's totally different from what came before. I mean, not totally. Obviously, it's the same analogy.
Yeah, it's analogical, but it is surpassing it in a way that the previous thing couldn't comprehend. Yeah. Otherwise, it would have already been there.
Yeah,
and therefore,
and then it wouldn't be growth.
Yeah. and so therefore, there's a certain. Like suffer. I don't want to say suffering, because if we're talking about without sin, I don't know that we would experience it as suffering, but it's something like suffering.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there is something. I mean, I always used to just. One has to be. These are very delicate matters, and one can very easily go astray on this. But I used to just laugh mockingly at Aristotle when he would try to justify. The heroic act of self-sacrifice of the nobleman, without an appeal to a transcendent good or some kind of a sense of immortality, and he justifies it by saying, in that moment there's such an intense pleasure that one finds so much joy in that moment that's and it's rare, and it lasts for half a second, maybe. It depends on what kind of sacrificial death it is, but that noble pleasures tend to be rare, and so and I used to think that's just absurd. But there's actually something true in it. We all do experience, it seems to me, when we do some kind of a sacrificial act, there is a kind of an ecstatic joy that you feel in giving something up, or even exerting yourself in a way that's painful. Now,
that might be the sensation of exceeding yourself.
Yeah, that's right. So I think it would be something like that. Is that suffering? It's you see, and
something that becomes suffering after sin is introduced.
Yeah. That's the safest way to put it.
But the reason why I bring this up in the context of coercion, or that role of the king, is that I wonder if priest, prophet, and king. Okay, but then part of king is a martial component, the king is not only a leader in the sense we've been talking about, he's also a war chief, right? Like he's also the one who leads out the host, right? And and I don't just mean outside the borders, but also inside. Like we are going to grow, and that means we must destroy what we were. Right. And that's right. And that has a war, like a martial component to it.
Yeah. I would go there.
Maybe that's too far. I don't.
No. I mean, with all the qualifications, you don't want to essentialize war or something like that.
No, I don't.
But if one makes that qualification, I mean, absolutely. And I mean, the thing is, there's something in one. I mean, this is the thumos. There's something in one that really delights in that. I mean, takes joy in that suggestion. We're gonna, my son has been he's got on this intense kind of work project, this sense of self-discipline he's getting up.
Oh, the workout. He's a
workout. It's
awesome.
quarter to 5. He gets up and starts working out and then preparing for his SATs and doing all this stuff. And the thing is, you could just see he feels so there's a kind of content fulfillment that he's experiencing now that he hadn't experienced before. And you just, there's something about all of us, I think, that kind of want to rise into, in spite of, even embrace the suffering that comes along with it. I mean, all of that stuff, I think.
Because even in Eden, there's first of all the devil already.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's the enemy.
Yeah.
There's the wild that has to be subdued.
Yeah.
And then even with the law, this is something that, I don't know, maybe I'm totally off basis here, but there's something about the divine command not to eat of the tree.
Yeah.
Where we're then told, but it looks good to eat, right? Our reason tells us that it's good. And yet there's something about that act of obedience that is the prerequisite. I think St. Thomas says it is the prerequisite, that act of obedience that doesn't make sense within our own resources.
Yeah.
That is the prerequisite for us becoming greater than ourselves. And that feels like that's the receptivity to the activity. And but that has a sort of conquest of self in there. Yeah. And if you have a society, that conquest of self would be more than just into the individual, but would be within the customs and the mores and the law that it has constructed for itself. Because the temptation would be always to make our law the law, to make the way we live the way life ought to be in of itself,
in a static
like
way.
That we've closed it and we have, and so there's this always humility of this is the way we are, but it's not the way being itself is. Like we were participating in something, and therefore we have to be open to modification, to change, to all these scary things.
Yeah.
Right.
It's interesting. I mean, you've been thinking about this in terms of a kind of virtue and discipline and ascesis and so forth. It's interesting. This resonates with something I was thinking about in a very different context, but I'm kind of surprised to see the connection here. I was wondering whether, to what extent is conversion essential to education, and to what extent is education in some respect also a conversion? Plato says in the Republic that teaching is ultimately education is the art of conversion, and that's how he defines.
Yeah, that's right.
And I thought, okay, is that teaching in a fallen world because we have these tendencies to turn to what's lower and to become fixed there, and so have to be turned around, or is there something essential to it? And it seems to me there's got to be something analogously essential to education. So even again in Eden, even in a perfect world that had never fallen, there's something about truth, beauty, and goodness that is there's this infinity to it. There's a kind of it's not my possession simply, even though it's meant to be my possession in a sense. It's meant to be something that I take hold of, but it doesn't begin that way. So there has to be this moment where I really do turn away from myself,
right,
and not just my sinful self, but my finite self, my own sort of finitude, my perfectly good finitude.
Yeah, that's one of the things Thomas says about the fall of when Eve eats, is he says something to the effect of, she wanted an excellency that was too great for her, or something of that effect. Like she wanted to jump to the conclusion.
Yeah, she wanted to become like God.
But there's this without the humility or
without receiving it as
the
a
receptivity
gift.
to it, but that it was but the excellency itself wasn't bad.
Yeah,
right.
That's
the thing.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, that's because that would then be a really twisted paradise that had bad stuff in it. So it's got to be somehow. I mean, it's interesting. You mentioned she saw that it was good to eat. It's actually interesting if you look at the at the story, initially when God created the trees with the fruit, he said that the scripture says it was a delight for the eyes and good to eat.
Mm-hmm.
And then when Eve is about to take the apple, she says, it's good to eat and it's a delight to the eyes.
Right.
Switches the order. So it's the same goods,
mm-hmm.
you might say, but the order has switched, and it's now in a kind of a disordered, excellence in a disordered version, as it were. I think that's important.
This whole line of conversation for me about, we started out talking kind of about the coercion and the command side, and then the way that there's something, and I don't mean this as a criticism of your essay, but as maybe an addition.
Yeah. Which
is that you talk about the Jewish, the Greek, the Roman contributions to the Christian conception, and all of that is true, but then I want to say, well, what about the barbarians?
Oh, right.
I mean, if we're talking about medieval Christendom, you're talking about the Latin Church.
Yeah.
Well, then we're talking all about the Germanic.
Yeah.
And there's that willingness to cross the border, willingness to undo that which was behind and break out into the new world, a sort of heroic freedom, right? Where that it seems to be a part of what we're talking about here, and that feels Germanic and barbarian, and not Roman, not Greek.
No, I it's interesting. I actually talk a lot about that in a different context, and I think it's absolutely essential. I tend to, don't want to get too schematic here, but it seems to me that the threefold, the Jews, Greeks, and Romans represent something of an ideal triad. But the reality of it is always that form has to be instantiated in something given, natural, real. I mean, there's a material cause as well, and it seems to me that's what the sort of Germanic roots represent. So instead of 3, you have 4 when you're talking about real history, and the Germanic represents precisely that, the kind of raw, the wild, the from below, that's not represented in the other 3, and so it's the sort of creative union of all of these.
And I want to say heroic. I mean, like the willingness. There's a certain willingness to break out of the law of the city and to go beyond its borders. That I think even in the ancient, in the Greeks and the Romans, the idea of the hero is the one who breaks out of that which the humans control and somehow makes it to the divine.
That's right.
And that has something that I think the Romans is certainly present in Republican Rome. But I'm worried that when we get into imperial Rome, the imperial structure and the divine, the idea of the divine emperor, and this is a suppressing of the heroic, and that reemerges through the conversion of these tribes.
I think I really like your point about the wild. And the wanting to break beyond. I love that, and that's something I'd like to think about more. About the distinction there with the Republic and the Empire. I'd want to qualify that, because in a certain sense, I think what your observation is right. I think there's a certain sense in which I have increasingly thought we tend to dismiss the role of the Roman Empire in the formation of Christian culture too much. There's something of value there that needs to be converted.
I agree completely. In fact, they're the ones who converted.
That
matters.
Right. So
Christianity emerges within the empire, and the empire converts. So
and in a certain sense, that sense of the empire, precisely. Yeah, this opens up a whole can of worms. But let me just put it there. But what is not present, and this is really interesting in the Roman Empire, is a sense. The absolute discipline is kind of the rule, and not the willingness to break beyond the rule.
That's right, and that's what I mean by even in a sort of boring sort of historical sense, when you look at the distinction between citizen a citizen soldier,
Yeah.
the citizen legions in the Republican period, converting over time to mercenaries, and but that there's something about that the free man that is the heroic man, is the man who bears the weight on his own, himself, right?
Yeah,
and that's something that is
it's in
lost.
the Greeks a bit.
Yes,
you have to say.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah,
you know, and they sort of had the reputation of being sort of wild and I mean that the connect, because you know what's the connection between?
Well, they certainly remember when they were that way, I think.
Well, that's but I mean it's interesting. What's the connection between the Greeks and the Germans, Germanic tribes is nature, but you have nature in its more kind of flesh and blood sense, and nature in its more kind of metaphysical sense, but they're sort of two faces of nature. I would say
that's why
there's an interesting kinship which Heidegger exploits in a very problematic way,
right?
Actually, by getting rid of not only the Jews but also the Romans. He hated both,
right?
And I mean, I think he's actually a very illuminating lesson in a way about what happens when you try to remove one of these pieces from the big picture.
Yeah, maybe we've beaten this we've gone too far down this road for the topic here, but it's interesting to me. That when I think about the barbarian tribes, it's not that I'm trying to identify something unique to them. It's almost more like they make present again something that was very old.
Oh, absolutely.
Because they come from an uncivilized place.
Yeah.
Right? And so that very old, that what was there before civilization, before the cities.
Yeah.
Do you know? And that there was that kind of warrior heroicism that the Greeks talk about because they remember when they were that way.
Yeah.
Do you know?
Yeah, right.
And now it's coming back into Christendom.
Yeah.
You know, that's maybe that's too poetic or too
no,
abstract.
but I think, I mean, in a certain sense, I would say that about all of these. I mean, that you know, to say, for instance, that the Jews bring God into the picture. I mean, God was there with the Greeks, with the barbarians. Yeah. But there's a certain way in which the Jews represent symbolically, sort of on behalf of everyone, the absoluteness of God. Mm-hmm. And so make that present in this new, Christian context. And the Greeks make present. So it's not like there was no thinking anywhere else.
Right.
But they make present the reality.
Yeah, that's the way these things often work, isn't it?
Yeah,
there's a sort of these things are present everywhere, but there are certain manifestations or here's where we see it most clearly. Which is, I mean, interestingly, this sort of brings us back full circle. That's kind of what authority does. Right, exactly.
Is make manifest in a kind of paradigmatic way something that's just simply true for everybody.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think that this idea of power, of authority and power, maybe one of the reasons why I'm obsessing over the Germanic stuff so much is because in the current environment, there is among these Nietzschean, neo-Nietzschean types that are just taking off, and it seems like everybody's into it now. There's this putting in opposition of that barbarian mentality to the Christian, right? And that the Christian is this servile, static, kind of totalitarian democracy. This and then you had the heroic, destructive barbarians, but I think that, in fact, if the way we're understanding authority and hierarchy is right, then it's only within the context of a true authority that what they are loving or praising in the barbarian is actually free to be it, be itself. It's actually able to transcend itself, to self-transcend, because it has the resources to do so.
Nice. Yeah.
Do you see what?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
So I'm almost, maybe that's the reason why I'm always, my enemies are always in the forefront of what I think.
Yeah. No. Yeah. I mean, no, that's really, I mean, this is the old trope about the, Christians kill, magnanimity was the pagan virtue, and Christians replace it with humility and destroy. I mean, but that's just simply, the thing is, that's true of a kind of modern version of Christianity, but that's not the tradition. That's why I really think the think about now all four coming together in Christian, medieval Europe. It's sort of the culminating kind of convergence of these, which doesn't mean then it worked then and everything else has been a failure. But just like, these other instances, I think it comes to represent what remains true for all of us.
Yeah,
but we have to recover it as like making manifest why you need all of these dimensions at once.
I mean, you consider that the way I was thinking about it is as the receptive movement or the passive movement, and then the active movement, and that there's both of those are necessary and are integral to what authority and freedom are. That in the High Middle Ages they were capable of combining those in the same person.
Oh, right.
Right? Like the monk who's also a warrior.
Yeah.
Right? And that seemed
right.
reasonable to them.
Yeah, that's right.
Right?
That's right.
But certainly the case, the same society sustains the contemplative in its most ambitious, with the heroic and the warrior in its most ambitious, in the sort of chivalric knight, who are literally brothers and literally view each other as engaged in the same endeavor.
That's right. That's right.
Which seems crazy to moderns.
That's right. But I mean, it's absolutely essential. And you just realize, I mean, this is the glory of the Christian form of holiness, is that all of these are essential elements, but they appear to be in conflict or contradictory. And then, you have G.K. Chesterton, who recognizes that, paradox is the sign of truth in a certain sense. The paradoxical, surprising unity of these.
Right. But I mean, like, faith. To bring it around, the idea then of authority.
Yeah.
You get this kind of false dichotomies that we're presented with, where, oh, you're one of these kind of pacifist Christian quietist types, and you don't really understand that power is real, right? And then the guys are like, power is just power. There's these false dichotomies, or this, as if these tensions which are real are somehow unable to come together into something greater than each of the components, right? And it's like, well, no, I can believe both in that authority is rooted in justice and in peace and in some sense of the people, some sense of the consent of the people in a sort of way, right? And then also believe that it's heroic and martial, and daring.
That's
and,
right. Yeah.
Right. Like those actually fit together.
Yeah. I mean, and the thing is, if you don't see that, then what you mean by this power that you're celebrating will always end up turning into something really banal and boring in the long run.
Well, it turns into the worst kind of servile totalitarianism, where it's like the life affirming. The life-affirming activity that you were seeing is just completely suppressed.
Yeah, that's right. And then you end up with a kind of bureaucratic.
This is going off on a rant of mine, Where you get some of these guys talking about the best is like talking about the ideal sort of eugenic breeding regime as if this is going to be empowering of noble man or something. When it's like, I can't imagine a more oppressive, bureaucratic rule of science and experts.
Absolutely,
something like that. It's
utterly
like the worst
soulless
thing you can imagine,
and lifeless. I mean, that's it. It just becomes. I mean, but that's the thing. That's why. One of the problems with the crisis that we face is that one's tempted to give a facile solution to it because it's so urgent that you want to fix it as quickly as possible, and so you end up with these kind of half measures that absolutize themselves, and these sort of trending kind of ideals that are basically haven't been thought through and don't really have much of a foundation and end up being just as ugly as what they're rejecting.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, the key is we have to get back to the original source and try to return to the center, which has all of this in it. And so, the bravery and the daring and that heroic virtue doesn't. That's not inspiring unless it's a love of, think about, this is why we all love Tolkien, right? It's a love of the king It's a love of there's a sense in which it's got to be in service of some ideal.
Absolutely.
And not just a show of strength. And if it becomes just a show of strength, it becomes boring again. And so yeah, you see every one of these facets has to be part of the whole for it to be a life-giving reality.
It's very, I mean, this is very, very true and very difficult to see. And I always hate this part of the interview, but I have to say it. Of the where do we go from here part. because my always answer is, I don't know, you tell me. Please tell me. Right? Because the first thing is, and you've said this many, many times, and I've really taken it to heart because I love it, that the first thing to do is get our thinking straight.
Yeah.
And that, of course, is the case. But it does seem to be the case that authority is hard to find.
Yeah.
And maybe even rarer is an understanding of it than the reality of it. I mean, you find it maybe more often than you find people who understand what it is.
Yeah. Well, absolutely.
So what do we do?
Yeah. I mean, I mean that's true. We can't be human without actually living authority and recognizing. I mean, this just happens spontaneously. So in a way, the seeds are there. The problem is we do have to recognize that we're part of history, and history is real, and we are at a particular moment of history that's defined in a certain way with certain traditions that are built in and institutions that are already here, and these things actually shape our imaginations in far more profound ways than we think. Mm-hmm. So even these actual instances of authority, we are filtering through an imagination that's been formed by our history, and so distort the meaning of it in all sorts of ways. So, we can't we have to think about it. We have to try to also come to a better understanding. Part of it is a learning of history and how where we came from. What are the roots of our, what are in fact the values? What are the institutions that are shaping us? Mm-hmm. We have to actually think about the nature of the institutions that we're surrounded with. But all of that is in the service, in a way, of transforming our imagination. Mm-hmm. And then, then the simple thing is just to live naturally. Right. I mean, and I do think, and so in one sense, this is impossible, because how are we going to change the institutions that are already here? But there's another sense in which it's very simple. I mean, reading quality literature to your children, mm-hmm. And in a way cultivating a certain sense of these ideals, and explaining them too when the questions arise. So all of these things are actually quite easy to do and simple.
Yeah.
But they do require patience. And they do require kind of a change of heart of all of us. I mean, all of us have too much going on.
I think that it's like maybe the hardest thing is overcoming just the laziness.
Yeah,
right. I mean, because like what you're saying is like with the children is very appropriate. I think that if you look at the places in your own life where you have power, and then it's like, well, am I being an authority, or am I just being powerful here?
Yeah,
right. Like, and then. Am I doing the thing that my power
do you see,
requires?
But do you know that, I mean, just asking yourself that question, your power becomes authority.
Right.
I mean, just in asking that question, you've actually changed the horizon. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's pretty remarkable. I mean, so wanting something other than sheer power is itself already a transcendence of mere power.
That's right. And that's really, well, it's easy to see where you ought to do it.
Yeah.
Doing it.
Yeah. Well, but it's kind of like the old thing about I don't have a desire to pray. Well, pray that you get the desire to pray. Exactly. And there is, and there's a certain sense in which you're never beyond the pale. Mm-hmm. So I think that's mm-hmm. something that, anyway.
Well, that's a good answer for me, and I think that if you're happy, I'm happy wrapping this up. Should we do it?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining us on this, and thank you very much, David, for that wonderful conversation.
Thank you.
Bye.